Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Late Night Table Talk. I'm your host, Eric Yurko, and it's about midnight in London already, so we should probably get started. Joining me tonight are Victoria and Alex of Cat Quartet Games to check in on what's going on with them, chat a little bit, and get their opinions on games they enjoy from outside of the United States. But before Alex and Victoria join us, I wanted to thank you all again for watching Late Night Table Talk. As I've said in a few episodes, we're sort of in the pre-season stage, so I'm trying things out with guests, seeing who I can get on the show, and testing out the format. So if there are people you'd like to see me talk to, or certain topics you'd like for me to cover, please feel free to let us know in the comments, and we'll see what we can do. I figured since we're already going to be talking with Victoria and Alex about games from outside of the United States, I'd switch up my traditional monologue a bit tonight and talk a little bit about games from outside the US that I've been playing, enjoying, and tell you a little bit about why I think they're cool. So, for those of you based in the United States, there are many publishers from many different countries outside of the United States making really cool titles. For tonight's discussion, we're probably going to focus mostly on South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. So let's get into it. You can see behind me there are already a variety of games here. I picked a few of my favorites, a few new titles, and some that I've been really into. And I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about games that aren't on this table, mostly because I'm kind of afraid to touch any of them because they're extremely precariously balanced. That Kushi Express in the back there, not stable. Pankotsu Factory, surprisingly thin. Not a good game to balance other games on. I shouldn't have done it, but I already committed to it, and now I just have to leave it here because editing video is a challenge. So if they all fall during the video, I'm going to try to make sure it makes it into the final cut, and it's just going to be an adventure for us. In lieu of that, I suppose, let me talk about a few other publishers that I really want to highlight. So one, you might be able to already see a couple titles back there that you recognize, is Oink Games. Oink Games is a Japanese publisher, pretty famous for their particular box sizes, as well as bright colors and themes. They basically only make like 2 or 3 box types. There's this one, there's this one, and there's a slightly thicker one. So let's talk about the games that I've got here. Durian, really neat little game. Comes with a bell, which I'm sure my friends are going to hate, given how I usually am with games with bells. We don't have to get into that. But it's a game of order management where you're trying to take orders in and make sure that you have the stock to fill them up, but you can't see what's on your stock card, only everyone else's. So you have to try and guess roughly when the order is fulfilled and about to be exceeded, so you can ring the bell and call the manager on the person who just exceeded the order. Super fun game. Really excited to give it a couple tries. Nine Tiles Panic is one that I've been really into lately. So as you can see, it's a little bit, it's very pink. It's the first thing that kind of sticks out to me. But thematically, it's a little bit different than games I've played in a while as well. The premise is basically that you've got hamburger-loving aliens, and they've come to town for hamburgers, as you might expect. And what you're doing is you're building a 3x3 city to match up certain challenges to try and maximize your points. Maybe you want the aliens to get as many hamburgers as possible. Maybe you just want to create a line of aliens. Maybe you want a town with no aliens. Or maybe you just want to make a safe place for people to walk their dog. All things that you can do in the game. Very cute. Love the color. Love the theme. Overall, just a great time. Sashi and Sashi is another publisher out of Japan that I'm really excited about. Generally speaking, a lot of the games they've made I've really enjoyed. One particular highlight was Let's Make a Bus Route, a flip and fill game about driving a bus through town, as you do. You pick up passengers, you drop them off, you try not to get caught in traffic that other players create. Very wholesome. Also really interesting because it has a shared central board. However, it was a little big and it's kind of stuck on one of my shelves, so I didn't bring it up. What I did bring up were 2 other games. So one is In Front of the Elevators, a game about, doing what you do and leveraging your charm to cut in line for an elevator. So that's fun. Also, Wind the Film. Wind the Film is of particular note to me as a photographer. I do enjoy games about photography, but it takes place in town as you go around trying to take various shots to satisfy, your own desires for photography. There's a particularly fun advanced variant called the Film Strip of Regret, which is the one card you don't end up playing becomes a shot that you are so overwhelmed with the sadness of not getting to take that it actually renders all points you would have scored of that color moot. You score nothing for them. Tough but fair. I've been also working with Big Cat Games to cover a bunch of the games that Ayako has been importing. So you can see a few more of those on my site, whatsartplaying.com. One that I've particularly enjoyed was a game called Tokome. Tokome is possibly the meanest game about horses I've ever seen in my entire life. You are trying to gather wild horses, and basically there aren't enough cards to go around, so someone will always be stuck with a bad card, and the bad cards are worth their value negated, so just huge negative values, and it is a punishingly difficult game. But it's fast, so the meanness kind of fades with time. Another one that I've particularly enjoyed, Hictarune. Hictarune is a super cool cooperative dexterity game where you play as up-and-coming witches and wizards trying to save the realm with your magic. The only problem is, in order to cast magic, you have to get the ingredients and the spells out of your spellbook, and your spellbook for this game is a card pyramid that you have to draw cards out of one-handed to try and pull them out to include them in your spellbook. Super cool concept, very tough dexterity puzzle, but it is a lot of fun. And the last one I've got from Ayako was Desktop Hibokon Battle Kit, also known as Crappy Robot Battle. So this one's very near and dear to my heart. It's, for those of you who have played a lot of games, a mixture of Patchwork and Robo Rally. You draft tiles to assemble a robot on your board, and there's a speed assembly component to it, because of course there is. You have to make a crappy robot, not a good one. And each of the tiles gives you a certain set of actions that you can perform once. So you move your robot around the board, try to push other robots off the board into the infinite abyss. As you do, great place for robots. And the winner is whoever scores the most points out of this battle. It's a very cute game. Love the theme. Love that it's based on Hibokon as well, which is a super interesting thing to look into if you have a chance. And I just think overall it's an absolute delight. I've also been playing a lot of trick-taking games. So a few of those coming out of Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan as well. One I particularly enjoyed is a game from Ninja Star called Yokai Septet. Yokai Septet is a game that is very much about the number 7. So 7s of many things. 7 suits, 7 cards per suit. Each suit has a 7 in it, but the interesting thing about it is that the 7s are staggered. So there might be a 7 in the middle of a suit, at the end of a suit, at the beginning of a suit, and you have to try and win tricks with cards of different suits that have essentially different values within their own range. It's a very cool little game. I like it quite a lot. And then the last one that I want to cover, I got a bunch of games in a shipment from Japan a little while ago. Trying not to date these recordings too much. But this one's called Antique or Ghost. So you, naturally, are trying to sell off a few of your possessions, donate them, etc. Unfortunately for you, many of them are haunted. So you have to kind of exorcise them before you can sell them off, because people aren't generally interested in buying haunted stuff. I find some pause with that because I have a bunch of friends that I'm 100% sure would be into buying haunted stuff, but that's the narrative of games sometimes. So yeah, I mostly just wanted to take the chance to show that there are a lot of cool games coming out, especially from publishers outside of the United States, and if there are particular ones that you enjoy, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear more about them. So let's bring on our guests. Alex and Victoria form 2/3 of Cat Quartet Games, a new publisher which has just kickstarted their first game, Gladius. But there's more where that came from, since it sounds like they've got Red Cliffs and Hot Takes currently under development. Excited to see what they've got planned, looking forward to talking to them. So please join me in welcoming Victoria and Alex to the show. Hey y'all, so thank you so much for joining me tonight. How's it going?
Good.
Doing well.
Yeah, as well as can be expected, I suppose. So
Yeah. I miss conventions, but I try to remember them fondly and hope that we can soon go to them again.
I think I try to remember that one time that I was at Gen Con and I bumped into someone by mistake and got all of their sweat on my arm. And that nightmarish experience really helps me remember that there are parts about conventions that I don't miss. And that's
yeah.
Hold that trauma deep in my heart.
Yep. I remember the time at conventions actually it was at Gamma, which was in March, which was like right as this was all starting to happen,
So
where
5 years.
5 years ago, right before the Animal Crossing era. Uh, yeah, somebody like approached me and was just like a spit talker, which
Oh,
during other times of year more okay, during this year not okay.
little bit of active danger. That's
Yeah.
chilling. Okay, so speaking of Animal Crossing, how are things for you in that on that front?
Well, I won the game. Well, I won the official game back in the early days, and then I had to, I had to stop. I couldn't collect every single item. I'm like, my island's pretty good. I'm never gonna be as good as these other people with their 5-star islands. I gotta stop trying.
I will say 5 stars is actually pretty attainable. I actually so I originally cheesed my way into it by just dumping a lot of
Yeah,
furniture on the beach and getting fences and stuff because I was like, I need that golden watering can. But I
yeah,
actually just from doing the like zones that I wanted to do, I actually hit
yeah,
5 star maybe like a monthish ago. Just
yeah.
kind of out of nowhere. I was very surprised. But yeah, no, I feel you on the like collector instinct thing. I've mostly
hmm
given up on like fish and bugs.
Yeah, I had a friend and she doesn't even really play games. I think she bought the Switch just for Animal Crossing, but she's an interior designer. And then like
Oh,
the next thing I knew, she started late. She started like a month and a half late, but she collected every single item in the game. And I'm like, "What is going on? You people are too good. I can't keep up anymore." So,
yeah, I worked a lot with Suzanne, so Suze has a lot of different items in the game, and so I would occasionally just ping her and be like, "Hey, do you have any of the like antique furniture set? I need it for my room," and
yeah.
work out details for that. It was very good, very good. But yeah, beyond Animal Crossing, what have y'all been up to? How are things with Gladius?
Things are good. We're pushing things along with the manufacturer. We got the sample copies. We've got like the Founders Edition. It's really cool when it all is physically here and it's like, oh, this is like a real thing that people are going to receive soon. So, and it's also stressful because you're like checking every card. It's like, is this card good? All right, is this card good? Do we use the high res image? It's like, so it's a
Oh
mix of
yeah,
stress and and excitement. But yeah, that's
that
kind of where
happened in a
we're at.
game I was playing once. I think they must have sent the wrong images to the printer, and
Yeah, it's
so
stressful.
all the cards in the game have like slight JPEG artifacting, or they're like a little
Uh,
bit blurry because they weren't designed to be printed at that resolution.
that
Anyway,
is
didn't want to add
bad.
to your stress. Mostly just.
Welcome to Board Game Publishing Horror Stories, everyone. Surprise, you didn't know.
I was
That's what
about to
this
say,
show's about.
I told you before this was not going to be a difficult Q&A, but I'll show you
Yeah.
some kind of blurry cards and be like, is this where we're headed? Oh, that's fun. That's fun. All right, well, what else y'all working on? Anything new, fun come down the pipe?
Alex, I think you could talk about it.
Oh, I have new
Like,
stuff coming on.
yeah, for people in the show who are like, how come Victoria's acting like she can't see Alex on screen? It's because I can't. So
Oh,
there might be weird pauses. Go ahead,
yeah.
Alex.
So we have another game in development called Red Cliffs, which is signed with Letterman Games, who did Squire for Hire. It is an 18-card game about being a strategist during the Warring States period of Chinese history, where you are fighting in the pivotal battle of the Red Cliffs. And basically, how the game works is you're trying to control 3 battlefields, and you draw 2 cards. You play one face down, one face up. The face up one, you get to use its ability. Face down one is hidden information from your opponent. So even though it's a very simple game, only 18 cards and only playing 2 cards a turn, there's a massive amount of decision space on what you want to keep hidden, what you want to show to your opponent, and what powerful abilities you want to use. So we're very excited to see that game come along.
Cool, cool. That sounds really exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. So, next thing we've got is a sort of game that I've been playing with a lot of the guests. We're trying to figure out if it's terrible. It's probably bad, but I don't have anything else to fill the gap between the first thing and the second thing, so we're kind of just gonna do it and see what happens. So, what it is, it's called Game the Name. So essentially, I'm gonna just produce a title of a game, and I'm gonna have you two try to describe what the mechanics of that game are going to be. We're gonna see where it goes. Probably spend like 5 minutes on it. If it's terrible, great. If it's great, then I mean, we can pitch it, make a ton of money, retire early, the dream. You know,
Yeah.
all that money from big cardboard we always keep talking about. So, just from reading through my show notes, I really want to hear what y'all think a game called Cat Quartet would play like.
Good one, Eric. Okay. Well, Cat Quartet, it definitely seems like it could possibly, like, music could be involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cats that are in a quartet.
So is it a game about music, or is it a game that has a musical component to it? Because I can just see drop mix behind you, Victoria.
Oh yeah, there's drop mix behind. I mean, like, it would be pretty ambitious if we did make it a musical game where it could be like there are there are four different cats, and you all specialize in a different instrument. Maybe like one of them sings, and you are trying to create the best harmony together somehow. Maybe it's
Yeah,
like a cooperative game.
I've seen some symphony building games that are super interesting, but also a lot of them seem very complex.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see one of those games, but like very simplified, and at the end of it, you create like some kind of a some kind of music that you can have and call your own that's unique
Mm-hmm.
to each game. I don't know how that would work exactly, whether you would produce the content with the players or if you like literally actually just have like a sort of garage band but for a board game where it's like, oh, you put together these melodies and it makes like a really terrible song. Like Drop Mix, but Drop Mix makes a really cool song. So it
Most
would
of
be
the
like
time.
Drop Mix, but like it would be like Drop Mix, but quartet music, like classical symphony, and with cats meowing.
Yeah, I've got the chandelier vocals card that I just every time I play it on anything in drop mix, it instantly turns the song really, really bad. But okay. So you could do something maybe with like chords, maybe, since I
Hmm.
know that those I know very
Progressions,
little
yeah.
about music. But you might be able to do something in that space. So what it might like would you want it to like physically include like maybe like a tiny piano, or are we talking like a very small horn?
It depends on how musical you want it to be, right? Like we could make it more. I mean, you could make anything a Euro game. It could just be like Cat Quartet, the Euro game,
Well, yeah.
or it could be like more of a like a party type of game um where there are four of you and you are given a prompt and maybe you have to try to meow the song. What? Why do you have that?
It's in Durian,
Does
the
it
Oink
work?
game.
No, I've never played that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Maybe you should get instruments,
Tiny instruments. Everyone should
tiny
get a tiny
instruments,
instrument.
and then
All I'm saying
together.
is, yeah, you throw a kazoo in there, you're instantly one of the like most reviled board game designers from parents. Like, put it on the front. Your game is the only board game that comes with your own little horn.
Love it.
Yeah. There's
That would
only
be.
really bad ideas in that space.
I kind of like the idea of a game that comes with like a set of bells that like are ascending notes and like it kind of teaches you the basics of music. So it's like you play a chord and it's like, okay, ring these three bells at the same time, thing, and then that's that chord, and it's like together either cooperatively or maybe you score points for building like chords in certain keys and things like that. I don't know. Musical education
Maybe
is
it's
such
just
a
a. Oh. Mhm.
no. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, like maybe it's just like a music dexterity game. Like you have different bells that are different notes, and then like somebody's flashing the notes that people have to play in a series. It's like simulating a rhythm game somehow in tabletop, which I don't know if people have done yet.
Mm.
I mean, the so I will say I've done this game a few times and we always end up at a point where I'm like, that does sound pretty cool, but that does sound pretty cool. Like you could imagine if you had something like bells or a small xylophone or
Hmm.
something where players were assigned maybe, oh, you only hit the red bell, and so you draw cards and you have players hit at the same time, like Alex was saying, to create certain tones. I wonder
Yeah.
how you'd have to. I wonder how you would have to structure that so there's an actual like gameplay component to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this could go in one of two different directions, right? One is definitely like the lighter party game where it's just very loosely structured. It's really just like a game where you flip over cards and that kind of guides you towards creating some sort of semblance of a song together. And then the other one is like a heavier one where it's like much more steeped in music theory and you're like building out like chords and different scales and different keys, and you like actually make a song by the end of it. That way it could be a lot more structured and you can like kind of guide players towards like very common openings or like symphonic progressions, things like that. I feel like I would need to know a lot more about music than all the music I learned when I was like 12, but that could be a very cool game. I really like the idea of a game where at the end of it, you and like the 3 other people you play with can now perform this unique song that this board game has guided you towards creating.
Yeah, I think you'd probably want to look more into like the concept of like auto-generated music, but I think there is something pretty cool at the core there. Especially, I like games a lot that generate their own artifacts, right? So it's sort of like we were talking about, something that you've produced at the end of it, and you're like, this is mine. This is my horrible drawing or something. Like getting people to be able to produce a song of some style or length that has a like auto-generated quality to it could be pretty interesting. I'm just saying, if y'all ever get bored of like red cliffs or hot takes, there's always,
We gotta get into that music
Yeah.
game
yeah,
space.
get into the music game space.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like it. I'm thinking about it now.
cool. Well, that's what this part is all about. It always kind of works, and I'm always a little bit pleased. I'm like, yeah, I thought this was going to be terrible, and it was fine. So let's move on to a little bit of the deeper Q&A that I have planned for y'all. So I'll just rattle them off. We'll see where this one goes. But I will say, though, that speaking of Cat Quartet Games, are there 3 of you? Are there 4 of you? Are you the cats? Are we the cats? Like, am I right now the cats? Is sort of the question. Is it Jellicles can and Jellicles do?
The answer to all your questions, Eric, is yes.
Fascinating.
Victoria, care to explain?
Finally, the
Yes.
hard-hitting journalism.
So I mean the true history of this. The true history of how we came up with this name was last summer. We were like, oh, we have to launch our Kickstarter. We need to form an LLC ASAP. We need to come up with some company names
Right.
and, choose one. I can't remember what some of the other ones were, Alex. Do you recall any of them?
They were all bad.
They're all bad.
Most of
Yeah.
our choices were like, here are all the options, and it's like, we hate that, we hate that, we hate that. Like, it wasn't like, oh, these are 3 good options we choose. It's basically, which option can we all agree that we enjoy?
Yeah,
That's
and
mostly how naming things goes in my experience. Like, trying to name both this production and What's Eric Playing are 2 decisions that I made after a long period of agony, and I hate. I regret them both.
There was a name we had. Canavan was the name.
yep.
Canavan Games. Because one time at a Magic event, someone misspelled Victoria's last name as Canavan instead of Caña. And I'm like, that's kind of like a cool sounding fantasy name. Turns out, I think it's like some kind of disease, some kind of tumor.
That's
Like, so
disturbing.
didn't want that to come up as the SEO result.
Yep.
So we were like, okay, that was like the name we were like preliminarily going with, and then we looked it up more and was just like, maybe not, even though it's like kind of a cool sounding fantasy name. So that was like the first name.
Yeah,
And then,
when we get misspelled, my sister once got a letter addressed to Jennifer Yuck,
Oh.
which when I was 8, I thought was the funniest thing I had ever heard, and now I think it's only like top 10.
Oh my gosh, that's so
it's the
funny.
best.
But yeah, we ended up coming up with Cat Quartet because we saw that there were a few people in the field where they just did like animal name, some other
Oh, yes.
word, and we were like,
Animal Games.
Adjective.
yes, adjective animal games. I mean, that could have been our company name. And so Alex and I really like this like comic book internet cat called Pusheen. I don't know if Alex has one. I'm like try to.
Yeah, I don't have one.
I've got one.
There's like a
I've got
giant
one.
Oh, there
one.
you go. Yeah. Eric has
wow.
a big one.
Oh wow, Eric, you have a big one too.
No,
Okay.
no, Eric
This
has a
is-
small
I
one.
was gonna say I have Ampharos, but there's
Yeah.
I think another one with a cookie behind him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Good
now I
times.
can't see. Now I can't see Eric. I can only see Alex. It's weird.
Oh,
But
well, there it
anyway,
goes.
there was a brief moment where I could see both of you, and then it changed.
Fleeting.
But yeah, so there are three of us. It's me, Alex, and my sister Valerie, and then the fourth cat is a rotating cast of characters. And right now, it could be you, Eric.
Wow, the dream. I believe Everybody Wants to Be a Cat is, I think, from the movie The Aristocats, which, since it's from the movie The Aristocats, I'm probably not going to expand on that further. Oof. Film's got some problems. Anyway, there was one question that I forgot to ask earlier that I always like to ask because I hate it when people ask me. So I figure that now that I'm in charge of questions, I get to ask them. So what's Victoria playing? What's Alex playing?
Ah, the
Yeah, you
classic.
get it. Yeah.
Who's
Yeah, no,
going
you
first?
understand.
Is it
Oh,
me?
me.
Oh,
Oh, I'm gonna steal this one before you can. Truffle Shuffle
Oh
just came
yeah.
out. AEG. It's great, wonderful game. If you haven't tried it, it's super cool. If you like Seven Wonders duels, but you wish you could play with more than just two people, that style of like drafting, but it's much lighter, so
Hate
it's not
drafting?
like hate drafting. Yeah, exactly. It's just like drafting to put your opponents in the worst position possible. And the game's about truffles. It looks delicious and it is really great to play. Super fun. Highly recommend.
Nice.
and then for me, so there's a game that I saw in the first look section at PAX, and I actually reached out to the publisher who is based in Japan. I think they're called Pra, and I got them to send me a copy. And it's called Makaryoshka. It's like a game where it's like a combination of like macaroons and the Russian, how do you pronounce it? Are they like
Matryoshka.
matryoshka?
Yep.
Matryoshka dolls.
Oh,
So it's like
I'm very
giant
glad you asked
macaroons
Alex because I was
that
like,
eat.
oh. Oh, I'm just staying in my lane.
Uh, but yeah, it's like a game. It's an abstract game where there are like big macaroons that eat smaller macaroons that eat smaller macaroons, and so it's like an area control game that is super fun and has great table presence. Played it at a random table outside of a Panera Bread. People were like, "What is that?" They were very jealous. It's awesome.
That's excellent. Cool. Yeah, I heard about that when I was placing my most recent order for games from Japan. I tried to get a copy of it. No dice. I think they're out of print, maybe. Yeah, as you do sometimes.
Yeah, I was so excited. Actually, I think you remember at that PAX when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so excited! I hope they bring this. I must get a copy." So, uh,
Yeah.
hopefully it
Well,
comes out in
hopefully,
the US.
yeah, I was gonna say, hopefully it gets a more expanded release. So, speaking of publishers, regarding Gladius, what made you all decide to go for sort of the self-publishing route rather than different partner?
Well, for us, we kind of are pretty new to the board game industry. We didn't know what we were doing. Gladius is our first game, so when we started it, we were kind of like, oh, we really like this game. A lot of people think it's super fun. We've been to a lot of conventions, and a lot of people at different conventions say it's very fun. So we started commissioning art for it, and that was like a really fun process, writing art descriptions, getting art back, tweaking it, designing the game around the art. Um, and like kind of we both, Victoria and I, have a strong passion for product design and like creating not only a good game but like a good experience for
Mhm.
players. So art, theme, mechanics all have to work together. And for us, that's kind of why we like to go the self-publishing route, just because we like to have the creative control over what the game looked like, what each card looked like, the design of each card. So we really like that nature of the self-publishing side. And that's kind of why we chose to do that for our first game, which is kind of like our baby. Um, but with like Red Cliffs, for example, it's like we were very happy to get a publisher who was equally as passionate about the game as we were. So they're doing a lot of good work on their end to bring it to the vision. So it can work in both ways. But just for our first game, we really liked seeing the process, and we learned a ton too about how publishing works, what it takes to publish a game, produce a game, manufacture, ship it out. So I think overall it was a good experience for us.
Yeah, makes sense. You get to pick up a lot of different ideas and details about the publishing process, and helps you better negotiate future pitches to publishers. And you now have the sort of self-publishing route that you've already built for future games in the same process. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, where did Gladius come from? So, what was your like original idea, and how did it turn into this?
So Gladius came out of us wanting to be game designers. We actually went to an event called Tribeca Games, and it was basically a festival dedicated to, the art of games. And so Riot was presenting on League of Legends, and we got to meet one of the game designers there, Stone Labrandy, and when we asked him, "Hey, how do we become game designers?" He said, "You should just try to make games with cards first. And when you're able to make games with cards, then you can move on and try to work on video games." So Alex and I tried making a bunch of different card games, and we both really like history, especially Roman history. And from trying out a bunch of ideas, that's where Gladius came from.
Cool. Well, it seems that the game's enjoyed a lot of success. I mean, it raised almost, I think, almost $100,000 on Kickstarter, right?
Mhm.
So, what were y'all's main takeaways from the campaign? Are there anything that you would do differently?
All right, Victoria, you
Alex,
first.
me first. Yeah, I would definitely say that the month leading up to your Kickstarter is always the most stressful time because you're trying to make sure that you have everything in and you finally have committed to a deadline. Um, so I would say what we would do differently is, well, one, we would plan out the stretch goals ahead of time. I think like planning stretch goals can be kind of weird, right? Because you have a goal. Our goal was $8,000 or something. So it seems kind of, what's the right word? Like presumptuous? I don't know, something like that. To plan for scenarios that you can't possibly imagine, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna plan for $100,000. I'm gonna plan for $1 million. Like that seems crazy, right? But I think in the future going in, we have to kind of have a plan for any scenario, like whether the game does really well, whether it does really poorly, whether it does, kind of average. Um,
Yeah, I think that
so
actually
that's what I'd
happened
say.
to a Kickstarter creator a while back, not in the games industry, I don't think, but
Hmm.
they didn't plan for their Kickstarter to do as well as it did. I think it did like pretty like maybe 100 or so times their expectations, and because of just the way the economy of scale worked out for all the contracts they'd already agreed to, it mostly bankrupted them because they couldn't get the volume discounts that they needed for the volume that they were making. It was wild.
Yeah,
Very
see, like
unfortunate.
that. Yeah, that's like the number one fear. So when we were doing like the stretch goals for our Kickstarter, the good news was that beforehand I had already chosen some stretch goals that I thought would be reasonable. Like I was like, this is our first Kickstarter. We're not going to add anything like too crazy as stretch goals. Like, we're not going to like suddenly have a miniature that we don't need to play the game and this that adds to the weight and like we don't know how to sculpt or anything like that. So most of the stretch goals that we added were like additional card content, like guest artists doing gladiator cards, like UV coating on the box and stuff like that. So we try to find. Oh, actually, I think one of them was like maybe we'll make a recipe. We'll make like a Gladius song. So we try to get creative with the stretch goals, so that way we could run a responsible yet exciting Kickstarter project.
Just the like next stretch goal is we're gonna make the box 3 times larger and twice as heavy.
Hail
Oof.
snow.
Yeah, I really like the guest artists one because I think it makes the game feel a little bit unique for the people who are backing it on Kickstarter while still giving them, we talk a lot about Kickstarter exclusives and how people are frustrated by Kickstarter exclusives because they, completionist instincts, yada yada yada, etc. But having something like guest artists just gives you like alternate art that you can play with while still keeping the base game pretty similar, and I've liked that for a lot of different stretch goals as well. And just I think art in general is a particularly nice stretch goal in those lines.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun to do. Like, for example, the 2 guest artists that we had, one of them was Inka Schultz, and she created a hyena gladiator card that turned out to be super, super beautiful, fantastic art. And then the other one was this like gladiator that was like an amalgamation of a lobster, an octopus, like a lizard, a bunch of different animals. And that was made by George Fan, who's the creator of Plants vs. Zombies. So it was a lot of fun being able to make gladiators that you wouldn't find in the normal universe of Gladius, but offer those to people who back the Kickstarter.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I've always wanted to just kind of like, if I ever did something in that regard, like have the guest artists just be people who like aren't good. So like me as one of the guest artists, like, yeah, I'll draw a card and include it in the game. People are like, this is bad. Like this should just be a negative stretch goal. Like it brings the stretch goal total back down $50 or something. That's worth considering. Maybe for promos or something. But anyway, so you two are 2/3 of Cat Quartet Games, as we've now established. Or how do you divide the work between you, and what do you two each specialize in?
I specialize in working booths at conventions and demoing the game.
You do well on that. You did teach me Gladius, so like I can confirm that's accurate.
That's my favorite and least favorite thing to do. It is my favorite thing to do when it's a fun game and the people are playing are great, which most people at board game conventions are absolute delights. And it's my least favorite thing to do when they're not absolute delights. So it's kind of like a weird thing. It's like high highs and low lows.
Mhm.
But outside of that, we do a lot of the work together. So like the design work will be like, okay, I have this prototype, let's play it. And then it's like, okay, we play it, and let's bounce ideas off each other. What needs to be changed? How should this be worded? Things like that. And then, yeah, like I said, I do a lot of more like hands-on work at conventions, and Victoria does the vast majority of the planning work and the work like that. So it's like our flights, our hotels, like where are we going, what panels are we talking on. She's like a master organizer, and just able to do all these things. So it's really nice having just a partner in general. Like when Victoria feels overwhelmed with the work, I'll do some of it, and then when I feel overwhelmed with the work, Victoria will take over. So it's just nice to have someone to bounce off of and divide the work between.
Yeah,
Nice.
we both do a lot of different stuff, and it varies by time. Alex is right. He does do a lot of the demoing, mostly because like I want to have fun at the convention. But I do set up everything so we can go to the conventions, like you said. Like I find the indie showcases, I enter us into the contests, I get us onto panels and stuff like that. So I do all of that. So then when I get to the convention, Alex he's also a really great demoer. He loves explaining rules to people, gets very excited. However, when we do have to do more like blind playtests or playtests where we are less engaged, I have to do those demos because Alex, he likes to really teach the rules, and I'm like, no, we have to see, depending on what level the game design or where we are in the game development process. Early in the earlier stages of Gladius, sometimes we needed to know, can people have fun with this game if we're not teaching them everything? So those are the times when I will do more of the demoing.
Fair enough. Has it been challenging for you two to work together on these big projects?
I would say no, except sometimes I'd be like, I quit, I can't make Gladius anymore. And Alex would be like, why are you quitting? You can't quit. You promised you would do it. And I'm like, okay, it's too stressful.
Do you just have like a little
Um,
marker board that's like how many times you've quit Gladius?
Days since we quit Gladius. Oh, back to 0.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And just so people don't get worried, this is before the Kickstarter. This is like beforehand. Because like the most stressful part was leading up to the Kickstarter. Afterwards, you have a more clear path. There's less like ambiguity about how you will do. So now, yeah, I have not quit since. Don't worry, everybody.
It's a very large number for days since last quit Gladius.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so pivoting from Gladius and Cat Quartet for a second. So we did a panel together at PAX Unplugged. So speaking of your excellent panel organizing skills, thank you again for organizing that. They were covering games from around the world. What interests y'all most about games from outside of these sort of Europe and US spheres? And what are some common themes or threads that you don't see as much in board game based in those spheres?
So what I like about board games from other countries is that they have I feel like they have a completely different sense of what is fun and what a board game should be. So, for example, in Japan, which is like Japan, Korea, like all throughout Asia, they have a lot of different types of board games. They especially have like lighter themes, lighter art. They also have smaller boxes, just like quirkier ideas. I know that there was like a Japanese board game that was on Kickstarter that was some sort of like dexterity game with like octopus tentacles that was shared. That was just like a really unusual idea that you probably wouldn't see made or even pursued in the US. And so, like for example, Oink, which has been getting pretty popular in the US, like I see them now at a lot of local game stores. Their games are super small, and I don't 100% know why they're small, but what my assumption is that like a smaller box means that it can fit in a smaller home because most people, according to me watching House Hunters International, most people in other countries live in smaller spaces. So you can't have like, here's my deluxe collection giant boxes in my house. You have to make board games smaller so that way you can have more of them in your house. And I think it's so awesome being able to challenge the idea of like what minimum components you need to have a viable board game. And then in addition to that, I think that in Japan you'll see like a lot of really interesting like product component innovations. So like the macaroon game, which I actually have here, it's like kind of a toy, and yet the game itself is actually not for children. It's actually a little bit
Take
like
that,
the
kids.
strategy in it. Well, the level of complexity of
That'll
this game
teach
is
them.
actually a little bit more complicated than the product itself would lead you to believe. Like looking at it, you probably think like, oh yeah, it's for 5-year-olds probably, but realistically speaking, you probably need to be 10, I think, to play this game. So that's what
I
I
thought you
would
were gonna
say.
say a much higher number than 10 for some
Higher
reason.
than
Like I was really expecting you to come and be like, you need to be at least 14 or 15. And I was like, okay. And it was like 10. I'm like, oh. The difference between like
Well,
a 5-year-old and 10-year-old is very small in my brain because I don't really understand kids that well.
it's a big difference. And also I went to Game School Con, which is like a convention dedicated to people who homeschool their kids and like teach them through board games. And I from doing that, from seeing kids at conventions and having them play Gladius, I have realized kids are a lot smarter than I thought. So, age 10.
I'll just make sure that the description of this video includes the phrase, yeah, Victoria used to think kids are dumb.
No, we can't have that be put out there.
just just an extremely good tagline. Yeah. What about you, Alex? Any favorites?
I really like when I don't know because it's like I think one game that really impressed me was like Seventh Night. It was like a
Mm,
game
I
very
love that.
similar to. It's so good. It's just like it's like everyone knows Battle Line because it's been made like 3 times, and it's pretty popular and lots of people like it. And it's like okay, it's a bit complex, but it's like once you get it, it's like a super fun area control game. And like Seventh Night gives me the exact same amount of fun I play from Battle Lines, but like it's half the time and it's way easier to teach. I can teach it in like a minute and a half. And it's like that kind of innovation. I mean, not that it doesn't happen in Europe and the United States, but I think like it's like, oh, that's like so cool. It's just like a distillation. I think a common trend I see among games, especially from the Japanese market, is the way they like to simplify ideas and concepts and mechanics to like create the same amount of fun with like no text or like very little text and like very simple designs. We discussed this in the panel, but it's like kind of hard to generalize regions
Right.
of like games where it's like, you know, lots of different games come out in Japan, lots of different games come out in Korea and around the world. But I just think it's important to always like try to find games from around the world, because you find so many cool gems that like exist outside of the like 50 medieval Euro farming games out there, you know. Nothing against medieval Euro farming games. I've just seen so many more of those than I have seen of like Seventh Night type games, or like
Mhm.
very cool, small, innovative games that have very simple mechanics but with tons of depth and strategy. So for me, it's like I just like these international games because they're like always a fresh source of cool, innovative games that I'm less exposed to. Maybe in Japan they're like, oh yeah, this is old hat. You know, we want to look at these fancy Euro games. You know, that's innovation. You know, so maybe it's like exposure bias, but
Me just pushing the entire octopus game off the table. Ugh, I've
yeah,
had enough of these octopus games.
these
Give me
octopus
something that I can
dexterity
understand,
games.
like gem-based trading during the
Yeah,
Renaissance.
So much.
something where I can move cubes from a lesser value cube to a higher value cube. That's what I
This
need.
box is too colorful. Where's my splatter? God, that would be a wild conversation to have.
But yeah,
Troubling.
so that's just kind of like what I see in games. Like I just really like the novelty of a lot of these games from non-US and European
Yeah.
markets.
Yeah.
And if either of you remember on the panel, like I think one of the most interesting games that we found was something that we probably wouldn't consider a tabletop game, but is technically kind of I think it's kind of a tabletop game. It's definitely like an analog game. Remember the top game? I think it's from Ecuador,
Oh yeah.
where
Oh yeah.
people spin a top on the ground, balance it on their hands, and then throw it at an angle to a circular disc on a rock to launch the circle the farthest. And I'm like, is that the OG dexterity game right here? That's some hardcore stuff.
Did you ever
So
play Seolan? It was, I think, it was a BGG con for a few years, but it was like this big, long wooden, and I'm using long to be like probably this, like much longer than this. Like it's a very long wooden board that has
mhm.
these like four holes with dots above them, and you have wooden pucks that are the exact same size as the hole. And so you have to try and slide them through the hole, but if you aren't perfect, they won't go through.
Huh.
And so it's mostly about
Wow.
like trying to hit subsequent pucks to launch the pucks. It is very fun. I've not seen it in a couple years, and obviously not going to see it at BGG this year, but hoping it makes a reappearance at some point because I always did really like that one. But yeah,
We'll
no, I think
definitely have
it's
to
nice
check
to
that
have
out.
a wider perspective on games that are outside of sort of your normal publishing routes, right? So like that's one of the reasons that I try to think of games that are outside of the United States when I'm doing a lot more like reviewing work is just getting a wider perspective helps me better understand the games that I commonly play. I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah. Are there any games that y'all wish would see a wider release stateside? So like, that you would just see in every local game store or Target, I guess.
Hmm. Well, okay, so this isn't something that really um could be, I mean, maybe actually I guess it could be sold as a book. So something that Alex and I have we both found recently is audio escape rooms, or it's like escape room RPGs. So basically, there's a designer. Her name's Jen McTeague, I think, and we were at somebody's birthday party board game convention, and Jen GM'd an audio escape room that she wrote, like two different ones. And what it is, it's like escape rooms, and everything is described to you. And it's like a role playing game where you say what you want to do. So it's like, hey, here's the room, it's described to you. And you say, I would like to look at the table. I would like to go into this room. I would like to travel through time. So, um, it's really exciting because for people who like escape rooms, which Alex and I both do, it was exciting getting to do this audio escape room because the escape room was able to include many like story and mechanical elements that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in a physical space. and it's also something that you can do with people remotely or at a distance. So I think it would be really awesome to have books of those available at, Target or at local game stores. And I think, I'm not 100% sure. I think this trend may have actually started from like a podcast in Australia that talks about escape rooms, called like Escape This Podcast or something.
Mhm.
So technically international.
Fair enough. What about you, Alex?
That's a great answer. I'm just gonna say Seventh Night again, but now that you
Wow.
made me think of that,
Seventh Night is really good, though.
it's
For
really
context,
good. I
Seventh
can't
Night is
stress it enough.
it's a quick 2-player card game where basically you'll move a fairy between one of 7 tiles, and you play a card to that tile to move that fairy that many spaces, but you can't wrap around or reverse back around, so you're limited by the cards that you have in your hand, and you're trying to play the highest sum on each of the tiles in order to claim them. The player with the most tiles wins. That one's super fun.
Somebody should localize it. Well, I mean, maybe it needs to get new art, like new branding, because I can understand how the theme might be hard for people to grasp, right? Like, why is it themed Shakespeare's Midsummer's Night?
I was gonna say, you're not really excited about Titania and Oberon?
No. Actually, I've never even read that play, so I don't know what happens in it. I just thought it was like some donkey, right? Flowers.
Yeah, probably.
Don't you know they play cards on a fairy and make her go back and forth, and then whoever played the most cards wins? That's what happens in the Shakespeare.
Yeah,
they
sure.
actually have one person who wins the play.
Yep.
Yep.
Wow.
They get to take home a copy and everything.
What a fitting theme.
Yep. It's very, 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 very particular. I wonder how you would retheme it, though. Like, just off the top of my head, I'm just sort of like...
I've been thinking about it a lot, but I haven't found anything that is like quite spot on. Like, because it's like that theme is kind of like random, but also it sort of works.
Yeah, it's abstract enough that you're like, okay.
Yeah, one theme I had in my head was like there were islands because they're kind of like circular, and you're moving a shark back and forth, like trying to get it away from where your island is. But I don't know why you're like controlling islands. I don't know. It's hard because it's like, what is the middle thing? What are the tiles, and what do the cards represent? So it's like hard to find a theme that makes those 3 work.
I mean, it could be like dibs, like here are cookies.
Cookies, I like cookies. Yeah.
You're trying to get dibs on them,
I was honestly thinking ballroom dancing, just for the piece, because I was trying to think of like what is the motion that's conveyed to me by just moving backwards and forwards through these spaces, and I'm like, I don't know how the actual like area control part comes into it, but I like the like
you're controlling the dance floor.
just a very
you could be rival musicians,
couple.
You could play music notes, and that's what gets the people to move.
Right.
Yeah. Or it could just be like a kind of unsettling theme like Hana Makoji, where you're trying to win over geisha. Which, by the way, I love that game. The theme is just kind of weird,
I've always just themed it in my brain as like you're trying to impress them by giving them by showing them how much of certain things that you have, but they're largely indifferent. Like you're like, excuse me, Adam, I have bought 3 loots. She's like, weird, I guess, but like, good job. And you're like, yes. that's how, when I play it, that's actually what my brain does for the entirety of the game. And so like, I've heard what the actual theme is from the people, and I'm always like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Like, just
yeah. I mean, the real theme is similar to what you're describing, though, right? What you have in your head.
I get they're wildly indifferent to your.
I think it's pretty close, but yeah, I think the wild indifference is something that my brain is just projecting onto the game. I prefer, if I'm gonna pick one of the like area control line games, I'm kind of with Alex on this one. I generally just always come back to Seventh Night. Like, it makes it into basically every bag that I take when I travel for like gaming stuff. It's real good.
Yeah, just put it in your circular pocket.
Yep, just
because it's a circular shaped game.
So I just redid my game shelf, and I actually have space. So both that and Abandon All Artichokes are games that I think are really only well displayed if they're up front. So I have a
Yeah.
spot on my shelf for both of them now, and I'm very pleased.
Yeah.
with that.
That's great.
Yeah.
That means you have to make more games with a weird shape so we can add to that spot for you.
Please no. It took me 3 days to reorganize my shelves. I was so tired. Anyway, I don't want to keep you all, but thank you all so much for joining me tonight. Why don't you tell people where they can find you online and what to keep looking out for in the future?
Yeah, so my name is Victoria Caña. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, wherever Google takes you at Victoria Caña. That's Cana. And you can also check out Gladius. It's available for pre-order now and probably for the next month or so. We hope to be releasing the game in early 2021. So it's just Gladius by Cat Quartet Games.
And you can find me at Alex Uboldi on Twitter, Uboldi, and everything Victoria said about Gladius. Stay tuned for news on Red Cliffs, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for joining. Like, really enjoyed having you on.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone. That's all the time we've got for you tonight. We'll see you next time on Late Night Table Talk.